For more on this, I'm very pleased to welcome Harel Chorev, a Middle East analyst at Tel Aviv University, joining us today from Jerusalem. Welcome. Just to start us off, what reaction have you seen to this killing from within the Israeli government? Are there politicians who are claiming responsibility for this attack?
Yeah, there are already several ones who are claiming responsibility, or at least expressing their joy about this killing. I think nobody has real doubts regarding the fact that it is Israel responsible for it. However, I believe Israel is refraining from taking full responsibility as to leave a way for Iran to avoid from reaction.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to ask you a little bit about how the killing of Haniyeh is going to impact the organization of Hamas, its internal structures, if at all. Do you think this will make a big difference?
I do, actually. I mean, he was a very important figure. Since actually the early days of Hamas, he was one of the disciples, if you wish, of Ahmed Yassin, the founder of Hamas. And he is a very important figure. However, Hamas, we need to understand, is not a centralized organization. It is what we call the network organization or decentralized organization with many strong figures. However, since the beginning of this war, Israel removed some of the main hubs, if you like, or main figures out of the picture, such as Salah el-Aruri, who was extremely instrumental, of course Haniyeh, and many key commanders of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So I think that the organization at the moment is really in a very, very severe situation.
And how would you say Haniyeh compares to those other figures in terms of his power and influence within Hamas?
Well, as a political figure, he's important. He's, if you wish, the president of the Hamas state. And his election is a very long, is an outcome of a very long process. Namely, if we will now need to wait for someone else that will take his place as the head of the political chamber, we will need to, usually it takes months on an ordinary day. These days, it's just impossible to replace him because the whole voting system is based on, connection between the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and other areas. And at the moment, everything is disconnected. So it is a crisis by itself. Who will take his place and who will represent Hamas' case on the international arena?
And so it sounds like you're saying that these will be almost impossible shoes to fill when you look at the diplomatic role he filled, for example, in carrying out ceasefire talks. Is there somebody who is an obvious successor to him?
Well, they can always put Khaled Mash'al instead of him. Khaled Mash'al already fulfilled this position of the head of the political bureau, but he has his own limits, so I'm not sure he will do it, although he's, as I said, experienced. Maybe Khalil El-Khaya, the only person I can think of. Khalil El-Khaya is the deputy of Yahya Sinwar. He lives in Qatar, but he is the deputy of Yahya Sinwar. He left the Gaza Strip shortly before the vicious attack of October 7, and he's probably the only one who can do this beside Khaled Mash'al, with all its limitations, of course.
Now, Qatar's prime minister has said, and I'll quote here, "How can mediation succeed?" referring, of course, to the war in Gaza, when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side. Do you think that this killing of Haniyeh is going to have serious ramifications for ceasefire discussions?
Well, I must say that logically he has a point there. But having said that, I think that Israel would not remove him, would not kill him if he had such an instrumental role within the hostages deal. It might be that in Israel he's considered as one of the barriers. Otherwise, I don't see the logic in it, but I do think that Israel has a different strategy at the moment regarding the whole issue of the deal. I think it sees what is going on in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas is totally dismantled, and maybe Israel is adopting a different way to approach the whole thing. And I wouldn't see a scenario they will kill a good mediator if he was such. I think they probably took him as something as a player who is more negative than positive from an Israeli perspective, of course.
I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit more about that. What do you think this different way that you've suggested Israel could be pursuing, what it looks like? What is this strategy?
Well, it's been more than a few days, okay, maybe even a few weeks, that we see that the connection between the Gaza Strip and the outside world is very shaky. Moreover, we're not sure regarding the Hamas possibility in the Gaza Strip to have, let's say, a viable, strong communication between the different parts. So I wouldn't exclude the option that Israel at the moment sees this whole infrastructure, military infrastructure of Hamas in the Gaza Strip as something that might be even further divided, and therefore to tackle each area where the hostages are being kept, solely or differently, namely to approach to the local leaders who are holding hostages, to offer them all sorts of things, and to try to resolve it this way. At the moment, this is something which is first connected to the Hamas situation in the Gaza Strip, even before we are considering what happened between the Gaza Strip and the outside or Hamas on abroad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on DW News. That is Tel Aviv University analyst Harel Chorev. We very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
And for the very latest, we can bring in now our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. Rebecca, has there been any statement at all from the Israeli government about Haniyeh's death?
No, Anya, there hasn't been, and that's not uncommon. That is, in fact, the usual way when it comes to assassinations. Israel do not generally comment on them. So we haven't had any official confirmation from them. Of course, Iran is definitely accusing Israel for being responsible for this assassination. But let's not forget there have been two assassinations. In fact, one of Hezbollah leader Fouad Shukr in Beirut, and the Israeli military coming out very, very quickly after that assassination, saying that they were indeed the perpetrators, that they carried out that attack. And that is unusual, in fact, for them to comment on such an event. And in fact, that is likely or potentially a way of signalling not just to Hezbollah, but also to people back at home, to other people in the region, and of course the US, that was the retaliatory strike that that everyone was expecting to come in the wake of this strike that we saw over the weekend, killing 12 children in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. And Israel said they were going to retaliate for that. But when it comes to the Haniyeh strike, there has been no official word from Israel. We have heard from some ministers, though we're hearing that the Prime Minister's office have actually asked cabinet ministers not to say anything, but we have been hearing them take to social media, or seeing them take to social media, hailing the assassination of Haniyeh.
And have we heard anything at all from the families of the hostages who are still being held by Hamas?
Well, the hostages are, of course, a very huge topic here in Israel. The entire country really rallying behind them and really hoping for a hostage deal. Of course, the families themselves desperately wanting to see their loved ones brought home. And this killing of this assassination of Ismail Haniyeh certainly brings about fears of the hostage negotiations and just where they will be headed now. They've been stalled for a long time, as we have been reporting, and this certainly doesn't bode well for those negotiations. Ismail Haniyeh was one of the key part of the key negotiating team for the Hamas side. He was considered by many as more moderate than some other of Hamas leaders, namely Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, and he was seen going on these delegations, going on these talks, talking to the Israelis, or not directly, but through mediators, talking with the Qataris, the Egyptians and the Americans about a potential deal. And of course, the families particularly worried, but the entire country worried about what this will mean now for those negotiations.
DW correspondent in Jerusalem, Rebecca Ritters. Rebecca, thank you so much for that. And we can get some analysis now from our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes, who joins me now in the studio. Shani, welcome. Let's talk about the timing of this attack, first of all.
Well, Haniyeh usually lived in Qatar. This is where he spent most of his life. He's out of the Gaza area for quite some time. Also, partly because he and Sinwar, the leader of the military part of Hamas, they're not on best terms. He's been mostly in Qatar and sometimes in Istanbul, in Turkey. It's quite a rare chance to find him anywhere else, and especially in Tehran. So Israel has, the way Israel sees it, had to seize that very rare moment. He's been in Tehran only a few days. So, just to think about the operation you would need on the ground, to gather intelligence, to be able to actually execute such a precise operation in such short time, just to tell you about if it is assumingly is Israel, what kind of operatives Israel has on the ground in Tehran. And that for itself is a message Israel is very happy to send to Tehran, saying we can make it to even, the holiest places for you, which is this compound of the Revolutionary Guards where he's believed to be was staying overnight. So definitely that timing and everything that connected to that helped Israel make even a bigger symbolic message sending there to Iran.
So as you say, we know it was an extremely precise operation, but are there any other details that you can tell us about this attack?
Well, we've been learning throughout the day. The Iranians opened an official investigation. It seems like it was an Israeli missile called Spike that was shot from not too far, a few buildings away from the secured compound where Haniyeh was staying the night. He was there just shortly after he met himself with the Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, overnight, just to tell you, the importance of Haniyeh for the Iranians. And, they tried to give him the best conditions, and they felt, and he also felt, that he is at the most safe place he can be in the world. And I'm sure he did not expect that. So this is more of what we know for now. We also know some of the Iranians are suggesting maybe the bodyguards that were surrounding him were somehow involved in maybe tipping off Israel. I think for now, Iran, the confusion, the anger, the frustration, all of that, might be leading them to point in all different directions. It's a bit too early to, drill down all the exact details of what happened overnight.
And what would you say can we expect from Tehran now? Well,
there's no doubt there will be a response. We've been hearing many people in Iran saying that I don't think this is the first priority that the new president wanted to deal with. He wanted to, bring more relief on sanctions and focus more on the economy. But, the Middle East and Iran specifically, you can never really just stick to that. However, I think we need to see the different possibilities for Iranian response, either through the proxies, whom we've seen acting against Israel in the last months, like the Houthis from the south in Yemen, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, which also, because of the assassination last night, before Haniyeh, also have their own agenda, clearing their, showing their grievances to Israel. So maybe something joint along with Hezbollah, that could be one option. Another option would be a direct attack on Israel. This barrier, this red line that was inconceivable for many years was already crossed in April. But then I think they would try to be very strategic in the target that they're choosing. It would have to be central enough, but then at the same time not too damaging in order to prevent a wider escalation, which I think is still the presumption. Iran would want to respond, but not lose control over a greater war. And a third possible scenario is for Iran to respond somewhere outside of Israel, maybe on European ground, maybe the Olympic Games now happening in Paris. This is something where many Israelis are pointing their fingers at. We know there's going to be tightened security for the Israeli delegates there. That's some of what we're seeing happening. And it could also be taking some weeks. We've seen it in the past. Iran will take time to consider and see what would be the most strategically, occasion for a response. We need to be on high alert for the foreseeable future. Let's put it that way.
From Israel's perspective, I mean, what is Israel's end game here? Because working towards a ceasefire doesn't seem to be the priority right now.
I think you're right in that aspect. This does not seem like a move of somebody who's trying to wind things down. Netanyahu was in the U.S. Congress last week, asking for more support, for more weapon, but more political support, basically asking for permission to go on. And what we're seeing him do is that he's doubling down his efforts, not only in Gaza, but also expanding into other, what Israelis call the axis of evil that is operating against Israel and going all the way in. But this is quite, when you talk about the tactics, about the ability to execute such an operation and the message it sends, I think it's quite impressive, But then, has it really fundamentally changed things on the ground? Has it brought the hostages closer to coming home? Has it brought Israeli citizens that had to be evacuated from the houses closer to coming back home? Or are we actually taking one step further into even more instability, even more bloodshed, even more a much wider escalation? I think this is the bigger question we need to ask today.
Which begs the question also, can the Israeli Prime Minister sustain this stance with the Israeli people?
Well, I think momentarily there's a lot of national pride. Aside from the hostages and their families, we see a lot of anger, a lot of frustration and sadness there today. But among the public, there's a feeling, yes, we're finally getting the lead. We're not just being, dragged to response, and we can still show that Israel has its military and intelligence might that we've been so used to relying on up until October 7th. So in that aspect, it is working. But I think, Netanyahu is a figure today in Israel that is so divisive. Those who are supporting him will support anything he does. Those who are against him oppose everything he does. I think it's a bit too soon to tell if this will actually lead to any meaningful political gain or political change in Israel.
DW's Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes. Shani, thank you so much.
Come on.
Now, the Iranian government says that a funeral service for Ismail Haniyeh will be held in Tehran before his body is then taken to Qatar for a burial. He was seen as a relative moderate amongst Hamas's leaders.
Ismail Haniyeh greets Iran's new president in what would be one of his last meetings. Just hours after attending the president's inauguration, he and his bodyguard were killed in a strike on his residence in Tehran. At the time of his death, Haniyeh was the political face of Hamas, the militant Islamist group that carried out the October 7th terror attacks on Israel. Hamas fighters killed around 1,200 people and took more than 250 others hostage, nearly half of whom are still held in Gaza. Haniyeh had not lived in Gaza for several years, but ran Hamas from Qatar, where he lived in exile. Born near a Gaza City refugee camp, the 62-year-old was the child of Palestinian refugees from the village of Al-Jura near Ashkelon. He joined Hamas when it was founded in 1987 and was arrested and jailed by Israel during the First Intifada, the uprising against Israeli occupation. Haniyeh was exiled to Lebanon, but he returned to Gaza following the 1993 Oslo Peace Accords. He became the Palestinian Prime Minister in 2006 and continued to rise through Hamas's ranks, eventually becoming its political chief in 2017. While Hamas's Gaza leader Yahya Sinwar is believed to have been the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, Haniyeh was seen as a more moderate force in Hamas. He has lost several of his own family members in Israeli attacks on Gaza, which have killed nearly 40,000 people since then. 3 of Haniyeh's sons and 4 of his grandchildren were killed in April. At the time, Haniyeh insisted their deaths would not affect ongoing ceasefire and hostage talks. Haniyeh represented Hamas internationally and moved around the region for diplomatic meetings. He was a key player in negotiations to stop the fighting in Gaza. Some fear his killing will be a major setback in achieving peace in the region.
We're going to bring in Hazem Balousha now. He's a journalist who reported for us from inside Gaza. Now he's in Cairo in Egypt. Good to see you, Hazem. Can you tell us what people in Gaza are telling you about this? How are they reacting to Haniyeh's assassination?
People in Gaza are divided into groups mainly. I've talked to many people on the ground in the morning, and the most essential and important part for them is to end the war. There are some people who were shocked and as they didn't expect this to happen and Haniyeh would be killed, especially he was in the exile. But still some others were shocked, especially those who are in favor of fighting Israel.
And what about reactions from Hamas? What are you hearing there?
Well, Hamas's statements were very calm, very stable. They mourned the leader. Of course, they promised for revenge. Still not clear how that would work. They are in deep fighting with Israel in Gaza. But I mean, how farther would they go? Would they go outside Gaza or not? They would wait for the Iranian response or any diplomatic mission. So Hamas wasn't clear and reachable on what they are going to do next.
Is there any suggestion of how this killing might change the internal structure of Hamas? I mean, who might replace him?
Well, Haniyeh, he got 3 deputies who are the leaders or the top leaders of the 3 main regions, Gaza Strip, West Bank, and abroad or the exile. The one in Gaza is Yahya Sinwar. The one in the West Bank was Saleh al-Aruri, who was assassinated in Beirut before, and Khalid Mash'al, who was the former top leader of Hamas, and now he's the top leader of the political bureau in abroad. So who's most likely, according to the structure, who would be the replacement? But it's not definite yet. It's not announced. How that would affect, it's not clear. Haniyeh is a symbolic leader for a long time. He was a prime minister. He's there are many people would be, how to say that they would think he was not replaceable. But officials and Hamas people I talked to earlier today, they said that the structure of Hamas is designed to be smooth of replacing anybody who was killed or left the movement.
Mm-hmm. From a Palestinian perspective, how might this assassination impact the war in Gaza? I mean, you said earlier, for the people in Gaza, the biggest priority is to end this war. But how might this impact its progression?
Well, it's a bit early to judge and to measure how that would impact the situation in Gaza. On the practical level, in the fighting, I don't think that would make any change because Hamas is using their maximum capacity of fighting on the ground, and they will keep going. I'm not sure, but I mean, reading the 9 months before that Hamas used the maximum that they could use. Definitely that would affect the situation, especially on the ceasefire talks. But on the fighting and the war, it's not clear. It's not the decision that made by Haniyeh himself as a leader whether to go for a ceasefire or not. Hamas is a structure. They have the military wing who's in power and more powerful than the political leadership, who's like mostly in abroad.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, I understand that political groups are calling for strikes in the West Bank, and I believe strikes are happening in protest against the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. How important are these strikes? What effect will they have?
I believe it's more symbolic strikes. This is like Haniyeh is a public figure, as I mentioned, that he was a prime minister. Hamas has its own people on the ground in the West Bank. There were some calls made by the Palestinian Authority officials, especially Hassan Sheikh and most notably the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, called Khalid Mash'al mourning Hamas for their loss. So this is more like a symbolic step that taken by the factions on the ground. I don't think that would make any change on the fabric or the situation in the West Bank. It might, but I mean, this strike is not gonna make a big difference.
Hazem Balousha reporting from Cairo. Hazem, thank you so much for your insights.
I'd like to get some analysis now with Makram Rabah, a lecturer at the American University of Beirut. He's joining me now from Lebanon. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Good evening.
Newly elected Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian recently had warned that an attack would have serious consequences for Israel. Do you think that that is now something that we can expect, both from Iran or from Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Well, at least a country that cannot protect its so-called guests cannot actually wage an open war against one of the most sophisticated military technological entities in the region. More so, while people claim that this new president is a reformer, he is just taking the words or the talking points of the Revolutionary Guard. In reality, what happened in the last 2 days, be it the killing of one or the top Hezbollah military commander and the killing of Haniyeh, is just another message that if Iran decides to continue this so-called fist fight, it will be not only damaged physically, but also morally. This is a huge blow to have someone assassinated when he is staying at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard hotel in a way. So saying that the retaliation of Hezbollah or any of the Iranian proxies would have a kind of a major change on the escalation of violence is not really anywhere to be found on the ground. This is just fighting words, and this is something which Iran has done before. I need to remind you that when their military commanders were hit in the Iranian consulate in Damascus, what was used by Hezbollah and by Iran are just a kind of theatrical jihadi moves, which only ended up making Iran and all of its proxies the ridicule of the international community.
So do you think we'll see something similar, a limited response perhaps, or has the needle here really moved closer to a broader regional war in the Mideast?
Well, the killing of Fuad Shukr yesterday in the suburbs of Beirut was in a way expected. The hit was expected, but no one was aware who the target is. However, while the killing of Haniyeh might sound as a big thing, in reality, he is a soft target, and he is not really the one who is leading Hamas on the ground. One has to remind everyone that Muhammad al-Daif is presumably killed by Israel. This is something which has not yet been confirmed, but there's indications that say he is dead. In the same sense that Ismail Haniyeh is just a talking head in a way for Hamas and has no real influence on the ground. So I think the killing of Haniyeh and any of the public figures of Hamas is expected. And I think that Iran and its proxies will just take this blow and look for another time to hit back. How they will hit back, I don't think that they have the capabilities, especially that the Americans will prevent Iran from doing this. And ultimately, I think everyone is weary and afraid what will happen if Trump is elected in the U.S.
Yeah, how would that, let's talk about that a little bit more, because we could be on the brink of a very seismic shift in U.S. politics. How do you think a change in U.S. administration would affect what we are seeing in these relations in the Middle East?
While Netanyahu and the Israeli government were very hesitant, or let's say calculating when they went for the Hezbollah commander yesterday, I need to remind you here that Trump didn't think twice when he went after Qasem Soleimani. And I don't think that Iranians are willing to suffer such a major blow identical to the killing of Soleimani. And while Haniyeh was killed on Iranian soil, he was not really Iranian in the sense that he did not belong to the Guard proper. So I think that having Trump in the White House will change the whole ballgame, because Trump will go after purely Iranian targets. And this is something that would force Iran to publicly and openly challenge the U.S. And this is something that they have avoided through using their proxies, because using proxies such as the Houthis or Hezbollah gives them the option of deniability. This is something that they cannot do if they decide to use the proper Iranian tools for this, or the official Iranian tools to retaliate.
Now, you've hinted at this a couple of times, but I just want to pick up on this point again. Today's killing in Iran, you've said, he's not Iranian, but still to have a foreign person there in a diplomatic role killed on Iranian soil, do you think that has caused Tehran to lose face with some of its regional allies?
Well, I think that Iran has lost face even before the killing of Haniyeh, because at the beginning of the October 7 Al-Aqsa flood, they claimed that they will come to the aid of the Palestinians, and equally Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has said once the land invasion starts in Gaza, we will come to the aid of our brethren. Ultimately, what the events have proven, be it the killing of Haniyeh or the killing of the Palestinians or the Lebanese, that Iran doesn't really care about Arab blood as long as the killing is not directed directly to its own entity. They simply are okay with this. So I think while they care about the optics, and this is something very important in the psychology of the Iranian regime, I think there are so little options that they can resort to try to regain and reinstate this so-called imperial facade, which is weaker than people assume.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on DW with your insights. That is Makram Rabah from Beirut. We very much appreciate your time today.
Let's take a broader look at the Middle East with Simon Mabon, a professor of international politics at Lancaster University in the UK. Good to see you again, Simon. What have you heard? What are you expecting to hear in the region today?
I think it's all been pretty predictable. It's the sort of statements that we were expecting from Iranian officials, from the Houthis, from Hezbollah, from all the usual suspects. There's been vocal condemnation. But there's also been condemnation of the killing in Tehran by Turkey, by Qatar, and by others across the region, with the suggestion that this poses a significant challenge to actually working towards peace in Gaza. All of this was to be expected. I think we know that there is a great deal of worry about escalation, but there's also worry that this type of attack, these types of tit-for-tat escalations can get out of hand. So it's entirely predictable that there would be these robust condemnations.
So would you say an escalation is now more likely in the Middle East?
I've been answering this question for the past 10 years, I think. Will there be an escalation? What about all the different moving parts of the various actors that are involved in various conflicts? And I think it's really worth stressing that conflict is devastating. Conflict will decimate the lives of people, and that few states, few actors actually want there to be a conflict because of the costs involved, the humanitarian costs, the political costs, the economic costs, and the costs to legitimacy of various actors being embroiled in war. So that being said, of course, history has shown us that even when various states or actors don't necessarily want to go to war, the events have a way of sort of capturing them and dragging them into conflict. So this is why it's such a precarious moment, because even though Hezbollah, Iran, and others don't necessarily want to go to war with Israel, the situation is so precarious that they may be drawn into it if the situation remains unchecked.
Israel has not yet taken responsibility for the killing of Haniyeh. Is the fact that Israel isn't saying we did it, is that part of the choreography required to avoid massive escalation?
Yeah, I think so, because the narrative would very quickly be that Israel has struck within Iranian sovereign territory, and that could very easily be construed by those who wanted to as an act of war. So I think doing it in a way that is to some extent deniable, although you read between the lines and it's pretty clear who is responsible, allows for the situation to be read and framed in such a way that can avoid escalation. Now, I'm not saying that is exactly what is happening here, but I think this reach for some form of plausible deniability is part of a broader strategy that can allow people to read into this in different ways.
Just want to talk about the United States for a moment. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken today said the US wasn't involved, was not aware of the Haniyeh killing. He focused on the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. Is that by design, would you say?
I think so, but I think it could also be emblematic of the broader tensions that have been emerging between the US and Israel. I think we've seen a lot of those tensions starting to emerge. We know that Kamala Harris has been speaking incredibly strongly about the need for a ceasefire. And so perhaps Mr. Netanyahu is realizing that he doesn't quite have the same level of support in Washington that he once did, at least in its current form. So I think right now there are definitely tensions between the two. But if the US was serious about actually achieving a ceasefire, it could be doing a great deal more and putting a great deal more pressure on Mr. Netanyahu and Israel more broadly to achieve the ceasefire, which is absolutely essential in working towards a de-escalation of the region. Getting that ceasefire is paramount and absolutely essential.
Thinking again about the possibility of escalation, would anyone benefit from a greater conflict or war?
Well, war is devastating, brutal, catastrophic, as the people of Gaza have endured over these past few months, as Israelis have endured in other times as well, of course. War is brutal. In that respect, no one thrives, no one benefits. In terms of who might benefit politically, of course, there are those who might derive some form of political capital, political legitimacy out of being seen to be embroiled in a conflict, either defending Palestinian rights, defending Iranian territorial integrity, or standing up as part of a quote-unquote axis of resistance. So there are, of course, people who could benefit. On the Israeli side, of course, the continuation of the conflict allows Mr. Netanyahu to retain his political position. Some say that his political career will be over once this war ends. So there are, of course, people who would benefit. But I would just remind everyone that it's the ordinary people of the region, the people of Gaza, the people of Lebanon, the people of Iran, the people of Syria, the people of Iraq, the people of Yemen, the people of Jordan, who have been enduring this violent instability for decades now, and who are at the risk of a wider escalation. They are the ones who would be paying the most devastating price.
Absolutely. Simon Mabon, Iran and Middle East expert. Simon, thank you so much for your insights and your time.